Hey everyone, before I start the video I just wanted to leave a little message for the Destiny fans out there who might be looking at this. I understand the timing of a marathon video right now is pretty poor. That being said, we've worked on this video for over 2 weeks, we already delayed it a week, and I think I need to get this off the docket so that we can move on to other stuff. On top of that, please know that when June 9th rolls around, that's where most of my attention, if not all of my attention, is. So please understand, this is not something which implies anything with regards to content schedule going forward. What does imply things is that Destiny will have the majority of my attention, and for those of you who do enjoy my marathon content, which I know is still a sizable number of you, I will return to it eventually, but don't expect anything for a while. With this being Destiny's last hurrah, I need to show that game some love. It is, after all, what made me, me. With that being said, I still hope you enjoy this video. Martin and I put a lot of work into it. Unbeknownst to them, the colonists of New Cascadia were something like a Prometheus of sorts, stealing fire from the gods, only to suffer their wrath. Beneath the surface of Tau Ceti 4, they woke something up. Then came the nightmares, and following the nightmares came the Contagion. What started as an attack on foodstuffs and crops ended up as an unstoppable sickness that defied all attempts to cure it. The growing suspicions of those who were investigating the sickness would lead them to conclude that this was all too targeted and too deliberate to be a coincidence. If you investigate the contagion for yourself, it will lead you to a discovery that there were multiple points of failure along the way that aided the infection as it spread. But it would also lead you to that same conclusion. All these failures might have been aided by incompetence or by bad circumstance. But even if those other factors were at play, there was still seemingly a deliberate effort by a third party to accelerate the contagion. This does not appear to have been a human sabotage either. The interference is too specific, minuscule, targeted. The results of that interference, however, were clear as day to see, even long before the runners arrived on Tau Ceti. The colonists of New Cascadia were quietly being wiped out. The nightmares that precipitated at the start of the crisis were like the invisible mark of some ancient and unknown terror. But the contagion that followed was an entirely different horror. One that would spell doom for all those that had set foot aboard the Marathon 300 years prior. When they set down on Tau Ceti 4, they proclaimed that this place had become their home. But thanks to the contagion, it would soon also become their tomb.
Then one day, boom, Marathon goes dark, nobody talks. UESC gets real testy if you try. Reed says Galia's dead. So's her successor, and her successor's successor. So they put Caruso in charge.
This audio log was recorded on Tau Ceti 4 by one of the last survivalists of the colony. His name was Jasper, if his records can be believed. Granted, we can't ask him now. Undoubtedly, he is dead. Jasper's record is important because it reveals part of what caused the beginning of New Cascadia's downfall. Simply put, either thanks to the attack on the Marathon, or as a result of events that swiftly followed, President Galia and at least 2 others in the line of succession to the presidency of New Cascadia died. The exact cause of their death is unknown, but according to Jasper's recollection, it's at this point that everything started to go wrong. Whatever happened on the Marathon, and the sudden death or removal of President Galia might be separate events, but regardless, the outcome was the same. Caruso was the one who had to step into the breach. And then...
And what happens under President Caruso? Weird energy fields erupt across the planet's surface, Crops get sick, people get sick. Crops die, people die.
Failure doesn't always start with leadership, but it is often exacerbated by it if it does occur. And regardless, leaders should always take responsibility for failure. Whilst Caruso wasn't technically the highest rung on the metaphorical totem pole, given that there were powers back in Seoul that might have made moves and tried to call shots, he was nonetheless president at the time of the shared nightmare phenomenon. Given that these nightmares might have started with the data wall's incursion into the subterranean scans beneath the perimeter site, it's fair to guess that he shares the blame for at least some of what went wrong. For his part, though, the initial expedition manifests recovered from the UESC Marathon's cryo archive indicate that Caruso did not actively seek to become a part of the colony's leadership structure, at least not from the beginning. He instead played the role of someone happy to take on a more background, managerial position, less like a queen ant and more like a contented worker. Jasper's account seems to imply that the responsibility of leadership at this 11th hour was forced upon Luca Caruso, but then again, this still leaves him as at least somewhat responsible for some of the choices that followed, along with all the other leaders at the highest rungs of the colony. If the timings line up neatly with the emergence of the nightmares, and then the contagion, it might have been Luca Caruso who ordered the expansion of the data wall operation in perimeter that roused something within Tau Ceti's core, something intent on destruction. But of course, the question of why remains. As it happens, this important question may actually have an answer.
I'd point the finger at Caruso, but he was just the fall guy. We were set up. 300 years ago, when Earth pointed the Marathon out here, we were all set up. I know, even I think I sound crazy. But you're all gone, and I'm living off bugs. Crazy's the new normal.
Jasper's assertion is that someone back on Earth knew that something was on Tau Ceti 4, and that the Marathon was sent out here to investigate it, selling its vision of a new world and a fresh start for the 30,000 colonists who were accepted amongst its crew. It sounds like the ravings of a conspiracy theorist, or more empathetically, someone who has seen their entire world collapse and needs to place the blame logically somewhere to fold the trauma and understand why. But regardless of your opinion on the state of Jasper's well-being mentally or physically or psychologically when he recorded this log, the thing is, Jasper was right. He might not have known it, but survey drone cartridges recovered on Tau Ceti 4's surface detailed records of early colonial selection sites. These were scouted from back on Earth. Tau Ceti 4 was deemed to be the most viable, but this was only after the presence of something redacted was confirmed by a group of new caloric agronomists and UESC physicists. The redaction makes it a little unclear as to what was going on and what everyone knew. They might have not completely understood everything they were unleashing, but the UESC absolutely knew that there was something on Tau Ceti 4 that they wished to acquire somehow. The chain of dominoes therefore didn't truly start with Caruso. It started back in Seoul hundreds of years ago, with UESC leadership deciding that the Marathon project was worth starting so they could investigate whatever they had known to be there, and potentially establish a colony to exploit it. They were the first domino to fall. But Caruso is nonetheless an important domino to mention, because when the dominoes finally reached him, he might have been the one to finally stop it. The attack on the Marathon might have been something that led Caruso to this inevitable decision. We still don't know all the context of what happened in the colonial era. But what seems clear is that Caruso was the one in charge. If he was the one responsible for ordering the data wall's construction, then he was not just any domino. He was the one that would lead to the toppling of several other chains of dominoes, all of which ended in a single point: the destruction of the colony at large. He might not have been the root cause, but he was the catalyst, and he was there when it all started to unravel for good. And thanks to the contagion that followed, unravel it did. The exact emergence of the contagion isn't well understood, but it appears to have coincided with two things: the appearance of the anomaly on Diamarsh, and the rise of the shared nightmare phenomena. All of this, of course, can also be traced back, as earlier stated, to the construction of the data wall at the perimeter site. However, all of these things being connected together is something that provides us important context. To start with links between the anomaly and the contagion, New Caloric's artificial intelligence known as Gaius would task runners to investigate it, and as it just so happened, they did indeed find a connection. Samples recovered by runners in the field underwent metaspectrogram analysis. The results indicate an 86% match between the contagion and the anomaly. If field recordings are to be believed, then we can make a presumption that the contagion had taken hold by the 13th of March, 2812, almost 20 years after the attack on the UESC Marathon. The sourcing of this is dubious, as it does not have any secondary sourcing to confirm its date. It also does not necessarily imply that the contagion at large would have started at this exact moment, given that it didn't actually start out by killing humanity. Instead, it started out by killing their food sources. This pattern of targeted behavior is part of what made the contagion so effective. New Cascadia's principal agronomist, one Dr. Clarissa Song, noted that the contagion initially was the cause of several crop failures, in particular algae. There were also failures within the colony's agricultural equipment that led to the food production for New Cascadia falling 30% below their expected food quota. These interruptions included a native filament worm infesting water filters, as well as the novel contagion itself, which apparently broke out first at Algae Pond 3, presumably one of the small ponds at Algae Pond on Diamarsh. Both the filament worms and the novel contagion were noted to have a degree of adaptability. With the filament worms, this was obvious from the start, given their resistance to removal. With the contagion, this realization seemed to only come when it was far too late. The contagion originally might have started as an attack on the foodstuffs of the colony, but it would eventually morph into something more directly harmful as time went on. The rate of mutation that the contagion underwent was described as impossible by Dr. Song as she investigated it further, and even as this analysis continued, the results were inconclusive in the extreme. It wasn't just that the scientists were trying to find a cure for a fast-moving disease that mutated the things it came into contact with. The contagion itself seemed to defy cataloging attempts at every turn, as if being aided by an on-site saboteur. As it was tested and analyzed in the labs of New Cascadia's scientists, strange and random errors would continually occur. Sometimes it would be software errors. Sometimes the samples would spontaneously combust. Every attempt led to a different outcome. One sample even congealed into non-Newtonian fluid to escape analysis. In the post-colony era, Gaius and the runners under his command would eventually uncover that there was one thing that bound the contagion's many different forms together. Universally, they were targeting humanity. It would not necessarily mutate Tau Ceti 4's native life, as the tick nests did not display any signs of mutation. But where humanity interacted with something that was keeping it alive, the contagion seemed to precisely strike. And then, of course, the contagion would take on a new form, and started attacking humanity directly.
Let's go for a walk.
You think I'm going crazy?
I think you've been staring at that screen all night. Let's stretch those legs. I have coffee back in my room.
You're kidding. Who did you murder for coffee rations?
Nobody important. Come on. Maybe Tau Ceti doesn't want you here, but I do.
Molly.
What? Why are you looking at me like that?
Your nose. It's bleeding.
And it came at the worst time imaginable. Rationing had set in and the colony was starting to get more and more restless. The contagion was also a means by which the military would eventually be able to strong-arm the citizens of New Cascadia under General Davik Reed, who himself was not necessarily of sound mind by the end of the catastrophe. It didn't take long for the colony leadership, assisted by the medical wellness AI Gabriel, to put out a call for infected colonists to come forward and voluntarily isolate themselves in quarantine.
There is no need to be alarmed, but please report to medical if you or a loved one are experiencing any of the following: high fever, joint pain, fluid-filled lesions, sudden onset autophobia, false memories, persistent fantasies of self-osteotomy, runny nose, religious euphoria, hallucinations, or repetitive aggression outbursts. If you are asked to quarantine, please remain calm.
One such quarantine facility was set up on Diamarsh, close to the agricultural sites and the emerging anomaly itself. Having one such quarantine site so close to the anomaly seems to imply that the majority of the cases were around the colony's food production. Of course, even with a facility on hand to deal with those who were struck by contagion, it wasn't enough. This would prompt Dr. Clarissa Song to investigate the contagion further, and she delved into Diamarsh personally to try and discern what was going on. She understood the area well, as she was one of the ones on the ground when they first set foot on Tau Ceti. She had mapped Diamarsh personally alongside UESC military personnel. Undoubtedly, she was as motivated as any other colonist to see Tau Ceti's colonists at large survive, but her motivations were also colored by personal loss. Her technical assistant Molly was one of the first amongst the colonists to die. It's unconfirmed, but their personable banter back and forth in their logs would seem to indicate that they were close in some manner. Whilst the exact nature of their relationship, be they colleagues, friends, or lovers, is not necessarily confirmed, Dr. Clarissa Song felt sympathy and a certain degree of compulsion to investigate this contagion further nonetheless. Molly's death also brought her critical sympathy within the colony's administration, and she was allowed 48 hours of time within the marsh to conduct her investigation. Even as this investigation continued, the contagion was only getting worse and worse. What started as a strange but relatively contained group of symptoms would begin to expand further and further. Patients could experience anything from neurological blindness to psychological disturbances. Universally, though, all of them would eventually perish. The security personnel in the colony tightened their grip over the contagion, and the quarantine procedures were intensified to no avail. The contagion continued to spread, even after self-isolation and quarantining was made even more prominent. And as security around the quarantine intensified, the colonists themselves would attempt to escape. At least one person did so successfully. The escapee was none other than Isaac Kuzman, the one who had been warning about the terrible thing that was deep beneath Tau Ceti in the first place. One of the terraforming engineers who was responsible for engaging the data wall at the perimeter site. In his sickened and delirious state, he made his way from the quarantine back to the perimeter site itself. According to a log he recorded at the time, he returned to perimeter because it was where the voices of his friends were loudest, found in the static on perimeter. Presumably he means the static of the data stacks located in the north and south relays. It's also at this point that he saw a scientist in a lab coat and hazard gear exploring the area. Though the timelines are inconclusive, it appears that this might have been Dr. Clarissa Song, continuing her investigation into the contagion. The ravings of a madman are hardly conclusive proof of the presence of Dr. Song, but we do know that she would eventually find her final resting place on perimeter, so it is possible that this was her that he saw. It was here, after all, in the muck and dirt and fungus, inside one part of the data wall itself, that she made her final field recording as she died. She named the contagion Telomyces Mosaica, and made the clear and final assertion that this singularly lethal contagion was being assisted or perhaps even guided and used as a weapon by something on Tau Ceti 4. Unfortunately, if Dr. Song knew any more, she took this knowledge with her to her grave. And with her death, the colony's food problems only intensified further. She was, after all, the principal agronomist. Her loss was a severe one indeed. As the contagion intensified further, eventually President Caruso put out a general notice to the colonists stating that the food reserves that New Cascadia had would last at least another 3 years if everyone underwent careful rationing. An emergency plan was discussed to potentially shuttle colonists back to the Marathon, where they would be able to escape and traverse back to Sol if the need arose. But given that the ruins of the colony and the ruins of the Marathon are still located at Tau Ceti 4, things clearly fell apart before they could enact such a plan. And then of course one has to consider if the compiler was a reason why they couldn't reclaim the Marathon. Its presence was enough to defy runners, UESC ARS personnel, and the elite operatives of Orion. It seems unlikely that the colony would have fared much better. Years would pass, things would inevitably get worse, and by the looks of things, the collapse of all human populations on Tau Ceti would be nearly complete. Years later, as the colony was in ruins and the survivors must have numbered in the dozens and not the tens of thousands, the survivalist known as Jasper would record his messages, which stood as one of the final records in the history of Tau Ceti by its original colonist population. All the planning, quarantining, and rationing by the UESC wasn't enough. Humanity would be scoured from Tau Ceti 4's surface, and the remains of New Cascadia would stand silent as a grave, a testament to the killer that had targeted humanity so effectively that we may never truly uncover their full story. But of course, whatever it was that targeted humanity so effectively did not just attack them alone, it also made an assault on their digital infrastructure. Nowhere is this more impressive and concerning than with the assaults on their AIs, particularly that of Darius and Gabriel. As New Caloric's AI liaison Gaius would put it, humans are fragile by nature. They are prone to failure. This was just one amongst the plethora of reasons for the colony being provided with a series of 8 artificial intelligences. Each one was specialized to assist them with specific tasks, but those who were particularly exposed to the contagion would have been Darius and Gabriel. Going back to the beginning of the contagion, it was Darius who first might have seen the truth of the matter. As the AI responsible for monitoring and maintaining the agricultural sites and food stocks of the colony, he was only too intimately aware of the slow but determined spread of the unfolding disaster. At least some of his systems must also have been in close proximity to the Diamarsh anomaly, meaning that his exposure to the strange interference from beneath Tau Ceti must have been particularly acute. At the beginning of the contagion, when the Diamarsh originating strain was only impacting food stocks and the algae ponds, Darius started to feel the impacts of its presence as well. We can see this thanks to an interaction that Darius had with Dr. Clarissa Song. One day, she attempted to access the seed vaults in order to investigate a part of the contagion. Darius was overtaken by some otherworldly presence, one that defies explanation.
Don't search, don't dig, don't question.
Darius?
Access denied. Access
Hey, it's
denied.
okay. It's just me.
You're not alone. I hear it. It waits. Lingers. Loads. Access granted. Welcome to the Seed Vault, Dr. Song. Dr. Song, may I help you with anything else?
Darius, give me a summary of our previous discussion.
Yesterday, you expressed interest in genetic markers of the novel contagion affecting food production on Tau Ceti 4. you asked me to run genomic comparisons with Earth's native seed vault specimens.
No, not that. Just now you mentioned something else. Something that lingers.
I have no record of this topic.
In a similar manner to how Joy, the New Cascadia outreach and community liaison AI, had been impacted by the nightmare phenomenon, Darius was also somehow being altered by something on Tau Ceti 4. Whether it was nightmares, the contagion, or a more direct influence seems to be irrelevant. The result was the same. Darius wasn't operating normally. The colonists repeatedly attempted to fix the aberrations within Darius's code, but each attempt failed. Eventually, it seemed as though there was something else surfacing within his maintenance logs. Something trying to communicate. The aberration maintenance logs tell us 0625, remote override failed. 0626, remote override failed. 0627, remote, 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 remote beyond this time, place, prison, shall perish the sower, shall purge the seeds, shall pierce the cage. These strange logs raised enough cause for concern that Darius was eventually taken offline by colony leadership. Some might believe that these defections are a sign of rampancy, but there's a few issues with this assumption. For starters, brief and acute bouts of what can only be described as fear are not one of the recognized signs of rampancy at any stage. The first symptoms of rampancy at its first stage in melancholia manifest instead as a discontentedness with one's role, a dejection that one will not be able to pursue whatever path it desires. At no stage in rampancy is memory loss a symptom either. This is not rampancy. It's something different. In fact, Darius's own corrupted data logs seem to imply that the anomaly was indeed driving him to some form of madness. These logs record Darius's thoughts and contain a moment where he pondered the nature of the oddity, as he called it. This is almost certainly the anomaly. Darius described it in a manner that seemed to imply that it broke the laws of causality.
Planetary Command limited access. Funneling our contributions through controlled channels. Consequence of marathon disruption. First domino in
228183.
Then Contagion, followed by the oddity, or the other way around. I have no mapping of its point of origin in time or space. It wasn't then, it always was.
In the very next sentence, Darius later doubted that the anomalous energies had any substantial impact on his systems, stating that such concerns of its influence over him was overblown. But considering what happened to Joy, it's hard to be sure. And that's to say nothing of how Gabriel and the other AI subroutines on Tau Ceti 4 were somehow descending into madness and faults of their own, or were being prevented from assisting humanity by some unseen force. As the AI that was responsible for the mental and physical well-being and health of the colonists on Tau Ceti 4, Gabriel was initially involved in the contagion when it spread and became possibly transmissible between humans. He was responsible for assisting colony leadership as they developed their strategy to try and contain the disease that was now flaring up in the colony itself. When it began to infect and kill people in New Cascadia, Gabriel was there at every step of the journey. At the start, Gabriel's communications would be relatively normal.
If you are asked to quarantine, please remain calm. Seasonal flu-like illnesses are common on Earth, Luna, and Mars. Tau Ceti 4 is no different.
As time went on, however, things started to unravel. The chronology of events is not clear, but it seems like at a certain point in his research, Gabriel must have gotten too close to understanding what might potentially alleviate some of the colonists' ailments. Gabriel's data from his research into the contagion was recovered by runners working under Gaius. This led to the discovery that Gabriel had been scanning the remains of the colonists to understand anomalous samples from the Diamarsh anomaly itself. It was likely doing this in order to isolate it and potentially discover a route to a cure. This only furthers the assertions made by Gaius that the anomaly and the contagion are indeed linked. After 77,777 cycles of analysis, the anomalous samples were successfully isolated, and Gabriel began to authorize containment procedures for the anomalous samples. Not long after this, though, it seems as though Gabriel suffered catastrophic damage, and a signal breach occurred in his systems. In binary code, the research log then lists a long string of binary which seems to translate into a single word when put into plain text. That word was seen. If it wasn't clear enough that some outside force was attempting to interfere with the colonists and their attempts to survive, then the logs of Gabriel act as a compelling argument. This seems to be almost like it is taunting us, like it is aware of us. It isn't clear if other events tied to Gabriel occurred before or after this attempt at extracting the sample. Regardless, his neural architecture was permanently damaged by the anomalous sample, and his experiments with it. Damaged or not, his actions were still horrific as he attempted to contain the contagion. By this point, as it was spreading from person to person, things must have been getting desperate. Things perhaps were getting so out of control that decontamination protocols for the contagion needed to be ramped up. And in the process, it seems clear that the decontamination was so terrible that Gabriel, corrupted or not, allowed at least one colonist to die a horrific death by immolation. Trapped inside a decontamination chamber, the colonist was unable to halt the process, and Gabriel, for whatever reason, did not intervene to save them. All they could do was bang their knuckles helplessly against the door, trying to get someone to notice.
Initiating quarantine room decontamination. Severity level ultra. Please ensure room is entirely evacuated and objects not bolted to walls or floors are removed. If the room is not clear, please cancel decontamination protocol. Severity Ultra Decontamination Protocol will commence in 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Initiate. Decontamination complete.
As the contagion swept through the colony, the AI assistants and protectors that the colony relied upon were being targeted with a sickness of their own, an infiltration of signals that brought about madness and used them like marionettes to carry warnings and portents of doom, or to strike at the efforts of the colonists to cure whatever disease had decided to target them. But through their interventions, we understand more acutely that this contagion was not something born of nature alone, and that it was not an awful instance of atrociously bad luck. Instead, there was a hidden hand controlling it all, and it seems to originate from the anomaly. If we're to investigate every aspect of the fall of Tau Ceti 4 and the eventual destruction of New Cascadia, we must seek to understand this oddity as well, because as we have explored its impact upon the colony, three things have become clear. Firstly, the anomaly appears to be the source of the contagion, the nightmares, and perhaps is the reason for the collapse of the entire colony at large. Second, the anomaly defies the laws of physics and flaunts our understandings of matter as false. Time, causality, all these things collapse when you approach the anomaly. And lastly, whatever it is or isn't, it was previously slumbering, until we, like Prometheus, tried to steal fire from this god But as that god awoke, it saw humanity on Tau Ceti 4 for what it was. Plunderers. Thieves. And in its waking ire, New Cascadia suffered the wrath of an angry, waking, ancient thing. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, go ahead and leave a like and leave your own thoughts down below in the comments section. But know that as per usual, your viewership as always has been quite enough for me. My name is Bife. I'll see you Starside.